Universal Orlando Resort and Diet Coke welcome everyone who's thirsty for refreshment and hungry for thrills. Come on, baby, take a ride with me. Florida residents, savor a 2-night Universal Orlando on-site hotel stay with theme park tickets starting at $149 per adult per night. And here's the cherry on top, 2 days of free dining for 2 adults. Details at universalorlando.com. Offer ends September 6th with travel by December 17, 2015. Diet Coke UPC code required. Restrictions apply.
Blog Talk.
Welcome to the Truth to Power show, and my name is Beverly D. And tonight I have as my guest Justin Thomas. Now, Justin Thomas is an author and a writer, and his latest book is A Company of Moors. And this is a book that centers around North Africa, and he's talking about the Black Moors more than 148 years after their flight from Spain. Also, Justin Moore has other books that he has written, and so I'm not going to keep him on the line long. I'm going to bring him up now, and we're going to have him to talk about his book and tell us a little bit about Justin Thomas. Greetings, Justin.
Greetings.
Thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your book, before we get into your book, how did you get into writing?
Writing has just always been there for me. Since about 4 years old, I've been writing. Kind of sounds odd, but, my mother was a teacher. My father, he was also in the school system. So, reading and writing were sort of ingrained into me and my 2 older brothers. And I just liked it. It was another avenue to express creativity because even at that age of 4, me and my brother Jason, who's about 4 years older than me, we were running around being goofy, thinking we could do what we saw in movies like Star Wars and cartoons and comic books, thinking we could jump from the roof, thinking we were superheroes and things of that nature. And when action figures got boring and the stunts got a little too dangerous to be physical, writing was a very safe medium to make sure we didn't get hurt. So it was just another avenue to express my creativity. My brothers, they did other things. My oldest brother into music, and my brother Jason, he would draw, or he does photography now. But come from a very creative family, and I just dropped into writing because I just like words, and I liked the way, you could express how you felt with words.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you also have other books that you've written too, right?
Yes. This is Company of Moors is my 4th book. And the first book that I did was called The Ronin Poets. And I published that under my name, Teferu Azar, which some people might know me as, especially as a lecturer and a poet. And the Ronin Poets was the first African-American narrative epic poem, and it was a bit of a struggle trying to get it published. Tracy Wingfield of the Chosen Publishing was the only person who took on the feat of publishing something of that nature, because, they say that poetry doesn't sell, but this was different. This was a story told entirely through poetry, but the more controversial side of the Ronin Poets was the fact that it was not necessarily violent, but it was black people fighting back against what oppresses us, all over the world. And, it had taken a scenario that the Pale King, definitely symbolic of white supremacy, it had crushed the world, and it just made it a post-apocalyptic kind of ordeal. And here were these black African warriors who got into their ancient, whether it be extremely ancient, like ancient Kemetic, or recent history such as the Moors, but their ancient understanding and knowledge and wisdom, and becoming, Jedi-like, and having these powers to fight back white supremacy, or fight back the Pale King and his thought police, which, I can understand people, when I was trying to submit the story to different outlets, I could understand people being nervous about it. And these were black and Latino publishing companies that were very nervous about publishing the particular story, what it was saying. They thought it was a little too militant. I didn't. I thought it was a fun-filled adventure that had a meaning, no different than The Matrix. But I guess when you are expressing something such as the ordeals that we as black people not only go through, but really need to wake up and defend ourselves against, it gets a little dicey. So I could understand their point of view. But, at the end of the day, even though Tracy Wingfield of the Chosen Publishing, when she took the project on, even though she understood it as a great piece of work, excuse me, there was also, it was something that had a lot of marketability to it. But that marketing procedure after 9/11 kind of got shut down. Commercials got taken off the air, and we lost the printer that was supposed to print us up, and distribution deals and things of that nature. And ultimately, we had to go through an underground run for the Ronin Poets, and I started performing it, and that led to a questions and answers with, going to black bookstores and doing book signings and doing questions and answers, and that led to me doing lectures. And ultimately, the second book, 12 Stories High, I had a different agenda, which, transferred into the next pieces of work that I'll be working on. But it was a book of short stories, 12 Stories High, and learning so much from Tracy Wingfield and her company. As it was a startup company, I decided to do my own publishing, and I built Ancient Art of Facts. And 12 Stories High was the first book that I put out. Again, it was a book of short stories, and a lot of them are very symbolic about what we go through, who we are as a people, black people, and different genres, so that they can be, they're horror stories. There's a story about a black man in 19th century America, 19th century America, and he's got a battle with the Headless Horseman, and the whole thing is symbolic of class between black people, light skin versus dark skin, the effects of slavery, the effects of religion that was brought to the slaves versus spirituality of who we originally were. And because I thought so much can be said in a symbol, because we are a people that come from telling stories with symbols and mythology, from Osiris to even what they call the Greek mythology, which was still our mythology, and even things with the west coast of Africa and Central Africa, and even the things we brought to Asia and the particular mythologies of India, it's easier for us to pick up symbols, and you can express so much more in a symbol. So with 12 Stories High and taking 12 stories with 12 different genres, going through all different types of time periods. And some of the short stories in the book are just about lessons of who we are and surprise lessons, like the story about the monk and the Moor, which I didn't know that, when you think of the 7 Cities of Gold, it's this sort of Native American, South American legend about the 7 cities of gold and Aztecs and Incas, but it's actually a mythology that originated in Moorish Spain. And the monk and the Moor, that particular story goes into what the 7 cities of gold are. 12 Stories High, unfortunately, I've taken off the market just so I redid the cover. I have edited the stories. It's going through another editing process, and it'll be back out on the market.
Okay.
But it was sort of like a, what I call a shotgun blast, because it was just, buckshot of things you, don't really see us as black writers writing about, particular genres, and issues that we don't often deal with, or sometimes we don't deal with the proper insight.
Now, did you find, was it easier to get that book out where you had problems for your first book? How was it for the second book to get that out?
It was actually very, very easy. I had spoken with Dr. Suzar Epps, who wrote the book Blacked Out Through Whitewash, and she told me an avenue to go through, and I passed it on to Tracy Wingfield at Chosen Publishing, and we used that avenue to publish the Ronin Poets and make it worldwide rather than continue to be underground, so now it can be accessed. So the second book, definitely, it didn't have any problems publishing. It was very easy now that I understood the publishing industry and marketing. It was easier publishing. The only roadblock that I had come in contact with was basically editing. Because a lot of times, especially now with the internet and a lot of print-on-demand things and a lot of vanity presses, it's easy for people to publish their books. One of the problems, however, is people don't take the publishing of the book seriously. So there's a lot of, and unfortunately, I concentrate more on, my brothers and sisters who are putting works out there. And a lot of stuff is being put out, but it's not being looked at carefully. Nobody's going to editors to sort of smooth things up. The actual process for a book in the mainstream, when you see a book on the shelf, it's been worked on for about a year and a half. Okay. And so, a lot of people, they just see the book and they just throw it out. So that's the second book sort of posed that problem. It was just me. And I'm sitting here trying to edit it, and as much as, I'm editing and doing this, that, and the other, my eyes get tired and I don't see everything. So the first print that got out was very embarrassing, and then I edited again with the help of somebody, but it still needed a good edit. But I really wasn't equipped, one, with time, and two, with sort of the manpower or team that I have now. So, several people working on the books that I put out, and editing. So slowly, as I build up ancient artifacts to be a legitimate publishing company, I'm coming in contact with what I need to do, what I don't, mistakes I don't need to make. And with the second book, although it got good reviews, it still lacked a certain fluidity. I wouldn't read that book if you paid me. I just I didn't want to look at it because I was embarrassed about what I put out, but I knew I didn't really have much time, and I moved to the third book, which was Code 47, Memoirs of a Hip-Hop Heist. Very easy to write, very easy concept. It was, based upon, I always say Code 47 is like Ocean's 11 meets Harlem Nights. where it's a good crime drama. It's a good heist, but it's sort of an esoteric heist, a sort of metaphysical heist, sort of like the Grinch stole Christmas. You can't really steal a concept, but they actually go out and steal hip-hop, or rather take it back, these young black intelligent kids from all walks of where we come from, you know, whether you're a college graduate, you're from the streets, or you're just somebody who, you know, run your family business, or excuse me, different backgrounds coming together, black backgrounds coming together and working on a common goal. And of course, this particular album that they create, which is called The Disguise, because it's all the lyrics are disguise of either mythologies, and they're disguised as actual hardcore street songs, but they're these mythologies that once the audience who gets into it starts listening, they unconsciously, and some of them consciously, start to code break the songs, and their minds start to open up, and they start to see the truth of what has been hidden from them. And then, of course, all sorts of hilarity ensue when the music industry starts to find out what this album is doing to the black population. And truthfully, while I was writing, going back to 12 Stories High, because it was just such a wide variety of stories, it got my creative juices flowing. So ultimately, while I was doing research for one story, I started coming up with concepts for other stories, whether they be novels or other short stories. And I had started doing research for one story, and that story was called I Wish Servitude. And it was about excuse me. Yeah, I'm just a little under weather. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're all right with it.
And so...
You drinking hot tea?
Yeah, because my fiance keeps reiterating that. Water, liquids, just trying to flush it out of me. I'm actually in the last stages of it. But ultimately, I was researching this story called I Wish Servitude. And I Wish Servitude, although it's a fantastic story about, fantasy, set in North Africa, maybe about 30, 40 years after the Moors left Spain, I wanted to do research about that time period because I wanted to make although I was talking about the 1500s of North Africa, I wanted to make a contemporary statement about black people. And I found out a lot of the politics that I was trying to create were true. So what I ultimately did is I then came across, excuse me, sorry about that. I then came across information, and I had already read the book, The Story of the Moors After Spain. And that particular book, written by Stanley Lane Poole, it concentrated on I believe the Barbarossa brothers, Redbeards. These two brothers were half black Turk and half something else, I think Greek. I'm not sure what their mother was. But if you look at pictures or drawings of their fathers, clearly was a black man, but they were a little bit more light-skinned because they were mixed, hence the red beard and the aspects of being red beard. But the story of the Moors in Spain concentrated on them. It didn't really concentrate on how organized these Mediterranean so-called pirates were. And the first chapter speaks about more or less about how the Moors are trying to take revenge for Spain, trying to take Spain back. The first chapter is even called The Revenge of the Moors. And they weren't really, when I did more and more research, I found out they really weren't trying to get revenge. What they were doing was they were going back for relatives. They were taking some stuff they had left behind. They didn't really want Spain anymore. And again, as we were coming back into the fold, as we were coming back into the fold of, excuse me.
Now, are you a Moor, or are you just doing the research on it?
Excuse me again. Doing research. I'm not within the Moorish Science Temple.
Okay.
I don't know, I just kind of walk with knowledge. If it comes to me, I accept it, I research it. I'm sort of open to all things because as black people, we created all things. I was saying this at one time during a lecture, at the beginning of a lecture that Brother Shabazz was putting on. And I said, one of our biggest advantages is a great disadvantage. And that disadvantage is the fact that we created everything, so we can get into anything. And we constantly want whatever we get into to be validated by somebody, another black person who's into something else, instead of, we constantly get into debates as to what is right and what is wrong rather than, you see it from this angle. So, I go, where the information takes me. And as a writer, I'm a researcher. And so it's best to keep an open mind. But, I 100%, totally 100%, have respect for the brothers and sisters who are in Moorish Science Temple, just as much as I have respect for 5 Percenters, Nation of Islam, because, these brothers and sisters who got knowledge, if you got knowledge, pass it on.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you did your book, the Code 47,
yes, did
you was a lot of your audience young folks?
It was odd. There was people who were clearly, I don't want to say older, but there were people all various age groups that enjoyed it. But I found a lot of the people who didn't were older.
Okay.
Whether they had a problem with, and they would single out little stuff. They would say, it was the language. Or they tried to villainize the main character because, as much as the book is sort of witty, it's not necessarily a comedy, but it's, these brothers and sisters, there's some lighthearted moments, when you're just hanging out with your friends, how it can flow. And they have those sort of conversations. But I found that the older audiences would make excuses because they tried to villainize the main character. Because there were consequences to his actions, but he didn't necessarily want those consequences to happen under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily believe they thought that he wanted those consequences to happen. My belief, and as I discussed this with my fiance, was that these people, because they weren't the most conscious, quote-unquote, of black people, that the book itself sort of grabbed them and shook them and made them look at themselves and say, look, you got to wake up from certain things. And the book, Code 47, not only is it not apologetic for being a conscious black book, a work of fiction, but it's also, I'd heard a lot of even conscious brothers and sisters complaining about hip-hop, but I never saw anybody, or complaining about anything. I never saw anybody taking a stand or having a solution for anything. So I said, well, let me invent this solution, and of course in the book it's going to work, and of course in order to create conflict with the plot and things of that nature, let me, have certain consequences to the outcome of these particular events and this solution. But ultimately, the main character did not want the bad reactions to occur to certain people. But I had somebody said they hated the book so much they couldn't review it. they said they just hated the book. So what they did was I was emailed someone's number, and I gave them a call. And this person had said, now look, they said, we're over the people that review your book. And the person said that it's not that, this person hated the book, your book, and because they had read the book too. Because when you say something of that and you send it to your, I guess, editor-in-chief, I don't know what this person was supposed to be, it makes you curious. So you go and read a book, because how can you hate a book so much you can't say anything about it? Say you didn't like the plot or something. So this person read the book, and they came back and they told me, they said, what is in your book shattered this woman's thought process of what reality is. You had taken concepts that she was very comfortable with, and you had flipped them on her. And she's not the same anymore. And the person had told me that they have dealt with people who, have been on drugs, and they have seen signs in people who are in denial. And she said, the person said, that's what this person is going through when they read your book, but her only way to react to it is, I hate it. But she didn't really hate the book. She hated what it made her feel and how she had to reflect on who she was as a black woman. So, I kind of consider that, a job well done. But it's when you put a book like that, any of my titles, into the hands of people who may not, and this isn't to be arrogant, but who may not have the consciousness or the understanding to read a heavy book like that, even if they're the target audience, they might not be ready to review something like that, because it's going to send you through some type of emotions. A lot of black people, we believe everything from good times to the Jeffersons, but we don't know what the real good times were, about who we were beyond America, who we are, and how much has been told to us that is a lie. And I remember, again, going back to Dr. Cesar Epps and talking to her, she told me that when she started doing research, she became so angry, and she held that anger for 9 years until she wrote the book, Blacked Out Through Whitewash, and it was sort of a release for her. Mm-hmm. But she said she was angry for 9 years, because regardless of where you fall in your consciousness, whether you're Afrocentric, whether you are a nationalist, occultist, metaphysician, health conscious, or all of them, and regardless of who you affiliate yourself with, if you sit there and think how many lies have been piled upon black people, it gets really scary. And that's why a lot of our reactions when we become conscious is to become angry. But you got to overcome that anger.
Right.
You got to overcome that anger. And that's what a lot of the stories are about in 12 Stories High, or even Code 47, because there's a particular character who has to overcome the fact that, at the end of the day, he's really angry. So,
have any of your books got it into the school system?
I think there was an effort for the Ronin Poets, but again, it is about, and I think anybody from 15 and up can view my books regardless of the content. But it is about, I don't want to just say how the parents feel, but how those particular black people who are about putting things through the school system, how they feel. I remember when we were in the middle of putting together the Ronin Poets, I was performing a little bit of it, not even a heavy part of it, but a little bit of it in front of these kids who ranged from being 6 to being 14, 15 years old. And they started getting interested in what I was talking about. And from a perspective of understanding that I was speaking to young children, I spoke to them about their history. And from a simplistic level, finding out what they were interested in terms of their superheroes. And a lot of them like Spider-Man, a lot of them like X-Men, a lot of them like Star Wars. So I started breaking down each and every one of those things and saying, well, X-Men is just your civil rights movement, and putting that into perspective. Spider-Man, Anansi, Star Wars, the Jedi, the ancient Jedi Capri, where the Wisdom Keepers is where he got the idea from, and giving that to them. But in the middle of doing that and having these kids starting to be interested, saying, where can I go read those? Their father comes out, and he has a fit, and we tell him what we're telling the kids, and he flipped out. And we were like, we're not like selling these kids drugs or anything, or even getting them mad. We weren't saying, well, the white man has lied and this, that, and the other. We just said, hey, look, this is who you are. We didn't even say that there's been a gigantic lie. We didn't try to make them angry, but interested.
But the young people didn't have a problem with it.
No, they had absolutely none, but they were shooed inside. We were given a lecture of how evil we were for filling their minds with such imagery of Anansi and black civilizations, how evil we were. And myself and Tracy Wingfield, and this happened in Jersey. We were in Jersey at the time. And, that's, so when you say, putting these things in the schools, all for it. And I do have the avenue for libraries and things of that nature. But it's about, will they allow that? Because information is dangerous. And this is another thing. Information is dangerous when it can spark creativity. Because even in trying to publish the Ronin Poets, and like I said, a company of Moors to me is a step forward because it ends the debate, because people are still debating whether the ancient Egyptians were black or it was a black civilization, or whether the Moors were black. Ends the debate. A company of Moors should say, yes, here's an adventure symbolic of what we were going through in the 1640s. And it doesn't make any apologies to explain. It does explain how the face of North Africa got changed. You see that in a subtle way. But it doesn't argue about phenotypes and how to break down the name Moor and what it really means. It just says, look, we're going straight ahead with that, because that's what they did. They ended the debate when we were winning it, and they said, well, let's just go make a remake of The Mummy. Let's go show ancient Egypt with a lot of white people and, building it, and we'll recreate it through Hollywood. And we just kept arguing with them as if we needed them to validate who we are. And then we became code breakers about, oh, look, that's what they're really saying. Well, this, you don't have to code break. It begins with who you are, and it goes to where, you need, what you need to become. So, and the pitfalls, and obstacles that are in your way to make you stay where you at. So, there is an attack on black creativity because there's not a lot of this type of writing in the black community. A lot of it has been centered around urban erotica, sort of these street stories that seem like a Scarface Godfather knockoff. And, urban erotica, which, sometimes written by somebody who's a little sexually frustrated and what their fantasies are and what they would like their life to be. But, and it sucks that I got to make that critique, because it means like for a split second, I got to go against my own people to put things into perspective. Mm-hmm. And depending upon their ego and where their ego is at, they're going to defend what they have. And not only are they writing these stories that keep us locked into a particular paradigm, they're not even written that well. It's like, at least get an editor, But it's, you don't see a lot of these stories, and I do feel in this, and I had this stress on me for the last 10 years that was released once I got A Company of Moors out, and I saw people not only getting into that, but going back to the older books. And again, I got to work on getting out the re-release of 12 Stories High. But
now, one of the people in the chat room says that one of the characters in the company of Moors is created from Bobby Hemet.
Yeah. Yeah, as I was writing this, it's funny because when I, in the late, 90s, when I started watching the lectures, going from the books to the lectures, and I saw the name Bobby Hemet, the first thing I did was say, I took the last name and I just said, Hemet, and I just Hamayat. I kind of broke it down to that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was, a lot of the stories, not only that I write, but a lot of the issues in A Company of Moors has to deal with the old guard versus the new guard, or not necessarily versus, but the passing of the torch from the old guard to the new guard. And one of the first names that I thought of was just Bobby, Hemet, and I just said, well, how do I make Bobby a 17th century Moor? And I just said, well, go back to what I first thought of when I saw his last name, and I just made his first name, Robert to Roberto, and then Hamayat. And knowing about Bobby made his character the leader of a group of occult assassins. I was hoping he would get a kick out of it, and I heard that he did like it. I was nervous, but a little thank you to say, I learned a lot from you. This is the best I can do because this is me and my medium in writing. So, he leads this crew, and he's a good guy and has a lot of lessons to pass on to the younger, the young guard as they come in, come into being, both the men and the women. And his character is sort of the keeper of ancient knowledge, and he is symbolic of those, those true wisdom keepers who have that metaphysical and occult knowledge and can go beyond, and also the historical knowledge to put it all together to pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the characters is Bobby Hemet, and he was one of the first characters created when I was putting all this together. A lot of my characters seem real, and again, this isn't any type of arrogance, but they seem real because they're usually based after real people to some degree. I don't take somebody's whole personality, but I'll just say, well, this right here, I'm just going to blow it up a little bit and create how they react around this and what they do around that. And that's a good example from that character you just said that you created from Bobby. That's perfect. Yeah. Somebody like Bobby definitely want to do him justice, and obviously don't want to make him angry. I mean, he know how to do rituals. He'd burn my house down or something. Like, I thought he'd make a cool character, but I guess not. But he did enjoy it. He liked the gesture. But again, and that does go back into being creative and not just making a statement about we are the Moors and we were the ancient, Kemites, but how to become that, how to mythologize yourself, how to, make yourself your own hero in this particular story of life that you're living anyway. So that is one way.
The ancient Moors and the Moors from Spain, were they the same?
That depends. In my research, a lot of people link them up. When I talk to people like Jose V. Pimienta Bay, lecturer and professor, and when I talk to, certain other people about the Moors, M-U-U-R or M-O-O-R, how do you link them up? And there's some people who have just told me, and even things that I've read that just said, black people are black people regardless of what we called ourselves. Because some people would argue that the Moors never even called them the M-O-O-R-S, never called themselves Moors. That was a Romanized term, how to describe a dark-skinned person or a black person. Moro, Mora, Muri, and all these particular things. But when you go into things like Lemuria, and most of the times, regardless of what we called ourselves, most of the times, if you break the word down, it means something black. because we're dealing with a people who are not caught up into thinking that there is something wrong with being black. You know, blackness is, you know, you look at the night sky and you look at yourself and you start saying, well, the cosmos itself is black. You know, the universe is black. You know, and you start looking at yourself as, you know, part of the universe. So you don't have this ingrained perception of how bad something black is. So when you look at, you know, Hemet, you know, the black land or land of the blacks, and you look at Moors and Moorish, of that particular nature. Books that I have read, I mean, I've never found a definite answer of one people being linked to the other, with the exception of, you know, some people say, well, yeah, those were Moors too. You know, we're all Moors. But, you know, when you read books like Return of the Serpents of Wisdom by Mark Amaru Pinkham, I believe, when he tracks the ancient dragon order and he goes from Lemuria into and over to Atlantis, over to Egypt, and he just talks about this ancient order that was all around. And then when you connect that to other books, I think in Stolen Legacy, he speaks about, George G.M. James speaks about how the Moors from, you know, who went into Spain were descendants of people who had left Kemet with a lot of knowledge and become wanderers until that particular age when they went up into Spain and, you know, it became Al-Andalusia. So when you connect, you know, this guy talking about the land of Mu or Lemuria, connecting it with even those people, there's a white lecturer, and he owns a magazine called Ancient America. His name is Frank Joseph. He connects Lemuria with the Olmecs, and then he connects that not only to Atlantis, but he also connects it to Egypt. So, yeah, you can say within that connection and migratory sort of fashion that absolutely, you know, just for the simple fact that, you know, these were black people, but definitely if you talk about that migratory pattern from, you know, ancient land of Mu or Lemuria to, you know, the Olmecs and Atlantis, and then you go over to ancient Egypt, and then from ancient Egypt, not only can you go east into Asia, and definitely Asia Minor and Mesopotamia and things of that nature, but then when that history goes through, you connect it up into Spain. But that wasn't really the first time we were in Europe, you know, as the Moors in 711. We were, Europe is named after a black Phoenician princess, Europa. And then you go into books like Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie, who talks about those particular, and he does sometimes use the word Moor or Moros, who were in the British Isles. And when the Moors who were in Al-Andalusia, Spain, were there, they connected with those brothers and sisters who were up there. So you can find a migratory pattern and connect all the ancient names and ancient black orders into one particular people. And after Spain, again, going back to the organizing, that's where I was very much intrigued. When I was studying this time period, I saw how they were organized. Now, organized crime goes back to all types of dates. But what I found very odd about this form of organized, I'm not going to call it crime, this form of organization, was that it mirrored so closely to the Italian Mafia, with having the generals, the underbosses, you know, the quote-unquote the dons, the underbosses, and how, you know, if you go to any forms of organized crime going back to Asia and Mesopotamia and things of that nature, you'll see that. But Sicilians always talk about, you know, first of all, you go with the word mafia. And when I saw such a parallel, because oddly enough, as I was putting all this together, still writing 12 Stories High, but researching this, and I was just eating up all this information of these Moors. I immediately said, well, the Moors have a connection with Sicily. They were there. They were gone. Then they had, relations again, changed the complexion of Sicily. That's why you got, like, the southern Italians and definitely the Sicilians are a lot darker because of the Moorish influence genetically. Even my teacher, 9th grade Spanish teacher and also 12th grade Spanish teacher, he would say, hey, that's why I'm so dark, because of the Moors. And in 12th grade, he gave a 2-week lesson on the Moors in Spain, which was brilliant. And because I had never seen that before, not in any school, especially, predominantly white school that I had gone to, teaching about black history and pushing it as black history, because they'll be very slick when talking about the Moors. They'll say Saracens. They'll say Muslims. Not all Moors were Muslim. And Muslim is an ancient name. So is Islam. So when you go into that, you get a little dicey. But when they say, the Muslims in Spain, what they're trying to do is conjure up an image of somebody who looks like Saddam Hussein or the modern, quote-unquote, tawny Arab, who, much like Latinos, is very new to the stage because it is about miscegenation. Not trying to offend anybody of different races, but it's about telling the truth. So they can get very tricky because they'll say the Muslims in Spain. So what they're trying to do is conjure up an image of somebody that's not who they were. They were black people, And when I was looking at this parallel history, I had said, well, let me look up in an encyclopedia the word Mafia, because I was going to Google it, but I said, you can find all sorts of stuff on the internet, and you cannot find all sorts of stuff on the internet.
Right.
So I went back to the old encyclopedias, and as much as the old encyclopedias can lie and be goofy, in their lie there is a truth. Even if you go to like a World Book Encyclopedia of the 70s, and you'll see something that says they were black, ancient Egyptians were dark-skinned Caucasians and black white people. Well, in that very stupid statement, they're at least saying, look, these were black people, but they're just saying it in such a confused manner. They just, in the 70s, they didn't know how to properly lie about it. Now they just say, well, the ancient Egyptians built this and they did that, and they're no different from the modern Egyptians of today, which we know is all false. So if you go back to some of these earlier encyclopedias, you can find some interesting stuff. And in this particular encyclopedia, World Book Encyclopedia of the 70s, I believe, the entry from Mafia, I was expecting to see the age-old, it was about how 3 men wanted to get revenge on a little girl who was killed because of some French soldiers, because at the time the French were occupying Sicily or something to that effect. And they said Mafia when she was killed, which meant my sister or little girl or something to that effect. So these 3 men were supposedly known as the Mafia to avenge their little sister. But this entry didn't talk about that. It said the word Mafia comes from a North African word called Maehfils, which means to unify. And that made perfect sense to me, to unify, to a union. That made more sense than a story about a little girl being killed. Because, Mafia guys are supposed to be very tough. They don't want to be known as little girls.
And they unify because it's like the different families come together and...
Exactly. And I then said, well, now let me go to the internet and let me see what I can find out. And I didn't look up Mafia and Moorish influence. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to see in a presentation all on its own, how can I see that there was an outside influence on this thing that, without trying to force it into a search engine. Let me just look up Mafia and see what I find out. And the next entry I found, and it stuck in my head, Maehfils, North African. And I said, you talking about North Africa, you talking about the Moors. So I said, well, let me research this again. So I looked up Mafia, and the next entry that I found this time online said it's from, again, a North African Arabic, quote-unquote, word, Maehfil, which means to boast or to brag. Now, that didn't make sense to me because I said, well, when you're in the Mafia, you don't boast or brag. I know a lot of mafiosos want to walk around all tough, but you don't. That's the movies, that's TV shows. Real life, you don't really want to do that. They practice something known as a merta, which is the code of silence. So you don't want to boast or brag. So that didn't make sense to me. But again, here they were marking the word mafia with something that comes from North Africa that became Roman.